Here it is, the video you've all been waiting for. DPA revisions for kindergarten, first, and second grade for the 2018-19 school year. Before we start talking about the revisions, just a reminder about assessment due dates. The first trimester DPA will be due November 2nd, 2018. This was on the assessment calendar in your handbooks with the reminder that it is under construction for this school year, and it will be delivered to your sites by October 1st, 2018. Just taking a step back on the purpose of the DPA, it is a benchmark assessment that measures progress on grade level content standards in ELA and math. The DPA provides the district and sites the ability to have a snapshot of student proficiency and student growth on their content standards. We also want it to provide teachers information that can positively impact instructional decisions such as pacing or interventions that are needed. Now, with that being said, in May of 2018, groups of teachers came together for our guaranteed and viable curriculum. In those conversations, they established tiers of standards: enduring, need to know, and worth being familiar with. And because of that, different suggestions for revisions were made at that committee in May of 2018. Over the summer, those revisions were put into place, and in August of 2018, teachers volunteered to come after school and look at the revisions that had been made based on the GVC suggestions, and then provide further revisions. So both at the workshop and then afterwards, they worked with either just themselves or within their PLC to provide more revision recommendations, leading us now to our quote-unquote final DPA for the 2018-2019 school year. Now, final is in quotes simply because it will stay for this year, but this is a living, breathing document that we want to continue to come back to make sure it still meets those goals of providing a snapshot of our student proficiency and student growth on grade level standards, as well as making sure that teachers can use it for instructional decisions. And again, the copies of the DPA tasks for this first administration for DPA 1 will be at your sites in October of 2018. Some clarifications before we get to the revisions. We know that these things are true, but we just want to make sure everyone hears it and we have the same message. We do not teach only what is on the DPA. We teach all of our standards, but we want more time and emphasis. And because of that, at a district level, we only really are assessing enduring and need to know standards. The DPA is one measure, and it is an important measure, but it is not the only measure. So it would be unfair for a report card grade to only be consisting of one DPA task or a score from one DPA task. I know we all know that, but just making sure that everyone has that information. Some DPA tasks have been omitted. That doesn't mean that it was a bad task. Simply trying to balance the time of instruction and the time of assessment, decisions were made based on the GVC for the enduring, the need to know, and the worth being familiar with, and I'll get into some more specifics for each grade level. But if a DPA task has been omitted, the PLCs still have the option to use that task as a common formative assessment. They can adapt it however they please, and that can be one of the items that a grade might be pulled for the report card. But the removal of a task doesn't mean that either the task was bad or that the standard is not important. It's again just trying to balance the time of instruction and the time of assessment. So coming back here, I'm going to show for each grade level where the GVC is, just as a reminder. All right, so the first DPA we're going to look at is our kindergarten math. Just as a reminder, here were the enduring standards that were categorized and tiered by the GVC committee back in May. We have our enduring standards, need to know standards, and then our yellow worth being familiar with standards. So on the left side of the screen, you can see the 2017 and 18 DPA for kindergarten math. And on the right side of the screen is the newly revised 2018 and 19. We will talk through some of the content, format, and scoring changes for each particular task. But right off the bat, you can see that the previous DPA had 10 tasks. The new DPA only has 9. That is because this task 3, has been omitted. That was counting forward beginning from a given number, as well as task 7, the identifying greater than, less than, or equal to. That has been both of those tasks have been omitted, and one of the tasks, the decomposing and addition subtraction, has been split into 2 separate tasks. All right, so let's look at the specifics of each of these tasks. You still have your student record sheet that you can use if you so choose to help you score and keep track of each of the, or some of the tasks. This is just meant to help you figure out which task is due what trimester and which corresponds to the specific Scantron numbers. You can see that for this first trimester, it is just 4 tasks. For tasks 1 and 2, they have not changed, counting to 100 by 10s and then counting to 100 by 1s. It has not changed other than on the recording sheet, we added these sections so that you could easily keep track for each DPA. On the number ID, again, it has not changed, so it has stayed the same. The writing numbers, the only difference was that we took off the bottom row, which allowed students to write on past 20. We felt in order to minimize threats and distractions, we didn't want it to become where the students were kind of second guessing their process, and some started down at the bottom and then worked their way backwards, whereas others went on from here, and we just thought it would be best to have the 20. But we did make 2 separate forms, one horizontal and one vertical. That's up to teacher and student discretion. They'll be copied back to back. For task 5, the biggest change is in the scoring, and it's right here that as of this DPA, the students will not receive an extra point for correctly counting with the one-to-one correspondence. It is just going to be they count them once and they get a score for the correct number of total objects. Basically, they were getting 2 points for every time because they counted with one-to-one correspondence in order to get the correct answer. So we just made it a little simpler there. And then part 2 is the old part 2 from the written numbers. So there are now 5 different objects to count and then write the numeral of. And it is the second part of what was just an oral one-on-one task is now oral, and then there's a paper component, but it is now worth 10 points. For task 6, these questions were changed to more appropriately address the addition, subtraction problem types. Previous to this, there had been questions that were change unknown or start unknown. Like, for example, there are some birds on a branch, 2 more birds came, now there are 5. That is actually a first grade level. So for kindergarten, we stuck to result unknown, where they know what the starting number is, they know what the change is, they just have to tell what the end or the result is. This is out of 5 points, and the questions are right here. They can use manipulatives for any of these, and actually just for the test at large, they can always use manipulatives or have a whiteboard or paper, pencil, anything they need to help support. All right, so task 7, there are some formatting changes. We decided in order to make it a little bit more rigorous, this was taken out of the previous task, which was the addition subtraction, and is now a task in and of itself so that it can be assessed on each DPA to show growth. So the task is still decomposition of the number 5, but they need to show 4 ways to decompose the number 5. Any combination of 5 is acceptable, and students may use the following worksheets, but they do not have to. They can just receive credit for doing it orally if they can do that, but they can use any blocks, bears, any counting, and they have the option of using this form, which is Form A, or the number bonds, which is Form B. But again, they do not have to actually record each decomposition. That will be on a later task. For this, all they have to do is either orally or in some sort of form show how to decompose the number 5. Which brings us to the task that probably has the largest changes insofar as the format. This task is where they're composing and decomposing the teen numbers, 11 through 19, into 10 ones and some more ones. You'll see in the standard that they can use objects or drawings, but they also have to record each decomposition by a drawing or an equation. So one of the scoring changes that was made is that they will not receive 1 point for circling a 10. We felt that actually lowered the rigor of the assessment because they had to stop and recount the 10. So here are a lot of different forms that you or the student can choose from. We have a number bond with an equation, but remember they have to use objects or a drawing to show it and then record by either a drawing, which could be a number bond, or the equation. They do not need to do both. So they have a space for the total and then either a number bond and or the equation. and back to back because it's going to be for 2 different team numbers. And then we also have the 10 frames that are now stacked instead of side by side. That was a common suggestion. So they're vertically stacked. And then again, there's a space for the equations, but they do not need to have the equations. They could draw a number bond just by any drawing by any drawing or an equation. Just read the standard and make sure you're scoring appropriately. And the geometry has not changed at all. But again, this is a last resort, this teacher shape page. Best practice is to have the actual 2D pattern blocks or shape manipulatives, and then the 3D shapes for the cube, the cone, the cylinder, and the sphere. All right, thank you. Okay, let's take a look at the kindergarten ELA DPA. As a reminder, here are our GVC, enduring, the green, need to know, blue, and worth being familiar with standards. And again, this led to suggestions for revisions from the GVC committee. On the right side, you can see last year, 2017 and 18, and this year you can see 2018-19, the newly revised standard, or the newly revised DPA. Now, for the kindergarten DPA, the largest change is that this concepts about print, the print concepts, has been removed completely. All of these standards were yellow with one being blue. And in order to balance the time of instruction and the time of assessment, it was decided that they were not going to be assessed. Now, concepts about print is still incredibly important, but it will now give you time instead of assessing all of your students on a fairly lengthy one-on-one assessment. It'll give you more time to do different tasks and activities within your classroom to make sure that that is being addressed. But it was not, because it is a worth being familiar with standard, was not something that needed to be on a district-wide assessment. So you'll see that that task is gone. That means that instead of 8 tasks, there are now only 7 tasks on the DPA. The pacing has not changed other than to address the fact that there's one less task in DPA 1. So now you're only doing tasks 1, 2, 3, and 4 because that original task 1 is no longer there. And then on 2 and 3, you're going to be doing all tasks 1 through 7, with the caveat that once a student passes at a 4, they can just mark a 4 on all next DPAs. Now let's take a deeper dive in looking at some of the different features of the changes. The only other large changes, I'll just kind of quickly scan through. This is the only change. So on the blending one-syllable CVC words, the framing out, the last question where they had to look at dog and log and tell me the sounds that are different and then receive 1 point for saying that the L sound and the D sound are different. That was too similar to the sound location part of the phonemic awareness section, which is assessed on part 2. So that has been removed. And now instead of 11 points, it's just worth the 10 points for those 10 words. So the rubric has changed because it's now not worth 11 points because this has been removed. The only other changes then, this has stayed the same. The only other change is the spelling CVC words. You'll notice that late is no longer there. It is, I don't know why I'm trying to write it. Sorry, just having fun. Late is no longer there. The silent final E spelling rule is not explicitly mentioned in kindergarten standards, but it is mentioned in the first grade standards. So it has been omitted to reflect the kindergarten standards. There is no harm in wanting your students to be able to spell late, but as a district-wide assessment, we wanted to keep it on the GVC standards. So feel free to put that on your own spelling tests or your common formative assessments within your PLC, but at a district level, it is just worth 5 points on these 5 words. So again, that is pretty much it. These have all stayed the same, but you're only doing tasks 1 through 4 on DPA 1 and then 1 through 7 on DPA 2 and 3. Thank you.